The moment I tied that ridiculous frilly apron around my waist, I knew my marriage was over. Not because of the apron itself, though the thing looked like it belonged in a 1950s housewife magazine, but because of the way my wife Elise smiled when her mother handed it to me. "Greg, darling, you know the tradition," Miriam Whitmore said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that comes naturally to women who've never worked a day in their lives. "The men serve the turkey, while the ladies entertain our guests." I stood there in the pristine kitchen of the Whitmore family mansion, watching my wife of 12 years nod approvingly as her mother essentially demoted me to servant status. Around me, 3 other sons-in-law fumbled with their own aprons, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. But they'd been doing this dance longer than I had. They knew their place in the Whitmore hierarchy. "It's just tradition, honey," Elise said, adjusting my apron strings with the same mechanical precision she used to straighten picture frames. "Mother's been doing Thanksgiving this way for 30 years. I wanted to remind her that I'd spent the last 6 months working 16-hour days to keep my boat repair business afloat after losing my engineering job. I wanted to tell her that maybe, just once, I'd like to sit at the adult table instead of playing kitchen help. But the words died in my throat when I saw the way she was looking at me, like I was an embarrassment she had to manage. "Of course," I said instead, forcing a smile. "Tradition." The turkey was massive, probably cost more than most families spend on groceries in a month. As I carved, listening to the laughter from the dining room, I caught fragments of conversation drifting through the doorway. Elise's voice, bright and animated, talking about her latest PR campaign. Her sister Julia's laugh, sharp and calculating. The low murmur of approval from their wealthy friends. None of them mentioned me, not once. "Greg, could you bring out the cranberry sauce?" called Allison, Elise's best friend since college. She didn't even look at me when she spoke, just waved her manicured hand in my general direction like I was hired help. I was arranging the turkey on the serving platter when the doorbell rang. Through the kitchen window, I could see a black Mercedes pulling into the circular driveway. Expensive, understated, the kind of car that whispered money rather than shouting it. "That must be Mr. Haskell," Miriam said, smoothing her dress. "Elise, darling, come greet him with me. He's considering you for the Pemberton account." I watched my wife practically float toward the front door, her face lighting up with the kind of genuine excitement I hadn't seen directed at me in months, maybe years. The man who walked into the kitchen 5 minutes later was not what I expected. Short, balding, wearing a rumpled suit that probably cost more than my truck. He looked like someone's accountant, not the chairman of New England's largest development firm. "You must be Greg," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "James Haskell, I've heard a lot about you." The kitchen went dead silent. Miriam's mouth opened slightly, her carefully composed expression cracking. Julia stopped mid-sentence, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. "Mr. Haskell," I said, shaking his hand. "Good to meet you. Please, call me Jim. I have to say, I was surprised when I heard you'd left Morrison Engineering. We were hoping to work with you on the harbor redevelopment project." He glanced around the kitchen, taking in the aprons, the serving dishes, the obvious hierarchy. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Elise appeared in the doorway, her face pale beneath her perfectly applied makeup. "Jim," she said, her voice an octave higher than usual. "I didn't realize you knew Greg." "Know him?" Haskell chuckled. "Elise, your husband designed half the waterfront infrastructure in this county. We've been trying to recruit him for 2 years. I felt something shift in the room, like the moment before an earthquake, when all the animals go quiet. Miriam's face had gone white. Julia was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Even the other sons-in-law had stopped their kitchen duties to listen. "Well," I said, untying my apron with deliberate slowness, "I suppose I should join you all in the dining room." As I walked past Elise, I leaned close enough to smell her expensive perfume. "Looks like your kitchen help just got a promotion," I whispered. The look she gave me could have flash-frozen the turkey. Dinner was a masterclass in uncomfortable silences and forced conversation. I sat between Haskell and one of Miriam's bridge partners, watching my wife struggle to maintain her composure while her carefully constructed narrative crumbled around her. Every time Haskell mentioned my engineering background or asked about my business, I could see Elise flinch. "You know, Greg," Haskell said over dessert, "if you're ever interested in getting back into large-scale development, give me a call. We could use someone with your expertise." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, accepting his business card. Though I have to admit, I'm enjoying the boat repair work. There's something satisfying about working with your hands. Of course, but don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often. After dinner, as the guests filtered out and the kitchen cleanup began, I found myself alone with Elise for the first time all evening. She was standing at the sink, scraping plates with mechanical precision, her jaw set in that way that meant she was furious, but trying not to show it. "So," I said, leaning against the counter. "Interesting evening." "Don't." Her voice was tight, controlled. "Just don't." "Don't what?" "Don't mention that your family has been treating me like the hired help for years. Or don't mention that you never bothered to tell them what I actually do for a living." She slammed a plate into the sink hard enough to chip it. "You think this is funny? You think embarrassing me in front of Jim Haskell was some kind of victory?" "I didn't embarrass you, Elise. I just existed. Apparently that's embarrassing enough." She turned to face me, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Fear. Not of me, but of losing control of the narrative she'd spent so long crafting. "You don't understand," she said. "This family, these connections, they matter. They're how things get done, how careers get built." "Whose career, Elise? Yours or mine?" She didn't answer, just turned back to the dishes. But I'd already seen everything I needed to see in her face. The drive home was silent, the kind of heavy quiet that settles over a marriage when both people have too much to say and no idea how to say it. Our house, a modest colonial we'd bought when we were still pretending to be a team, felt smaller than usual when we walked through the front door. "I'm going to bed," Elise announced, already heading for the stairs. "It's only 9:30. I have an early meeting tomorrow." I watched her climb the stairs, her heels clicking against the hardwood with military precision. When I heard the bedroom door close, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my workshop, staring at the business card Jim Haskell had given me. My phone buzzed. A text from Elise. "We need to talk tomorrow. About boundaries." I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Yes, we do." But I wasn't thinking about the same boundaries she was. The next morning, Elise was gone before I woke up. No note, no coffee made. Just the lingering scent of her perfume and the sound of her BMW pulling out of the driveway. I should have been relieved. We both needed space after the previous night's disaster. But something felt off. She'd left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. Elise never left her laptop open. She was paranoid about security, always logging out, always closing screens. It was one of her quirks, like the way she organized her closet by color and season, or how she checked the locks twice before bed. I told myself to ignore it, to respect her privacy and make coffee like a normal husband. But as I reached for the coffee maker, I caught a glimpse of the screen. An email thread was open, the subject line reading, "Weekend Plans." I shouldn't have looked. In a healthy marriage, I would have closed the laptop and minded my own business. But after 12 years with Elise, I knew the difference between her work emails and her personal correspondence. This wasn't about PR campaigns or client meetings. The email was from someone named Carter Blaine. The name was vaguely familiar. I thought he might be one of her clients, something in real estate development. But the tone of the message was anything but professional. "Can't wait for our strategy session this weekend. Same place as last time. I'll bring the champagne." See. My hands were surprisingly steady as I scrolled up through the thread. 3 months of messages, each one more intimate than the last. Plans for weekend getaways disguised as business trips. Photos that definitely weren't appropriate for client relationships. And through it all, Elise's responses, written in a voice I barely recognized. Playful, flirtatious, alive in a way she hadn't been with me in years. I sat down hard in one of our kitchen chairs, the business card from Jim Haskell still in my shirt pocket, and tried to process what I was reading. My wife, the woman who'd spent yesterday evening treating me like an embarrassment, had been having an affair for months with a real estate developer named Carter Blaine, who apparently had enough money to rent lake houses for their strategy sessions and enough charm to make my wife giggle like a teenager in her email responses. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how stupid I felt. How many signs had I missed? How many late nights at the office? How many weekend conferences? How many times had she come home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine? I was still staring at the screen when I heard her key in the front door. "Greg?" Her voice carried that forced cheerfulness she used when she was trying to manage a situation. "I brought coffee from that place you like." I closed the laptop and walked to the front hallway, where she was hanging up her coat and balancing 2 paper cups. She looked beautiful, as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the November wind, her makeup flawless, her smile bright and empty. "Thanks," I said, accepting the coffee. It was from Murphy's, the little cafe downtown where we used to go on Saturday mornings when we were first married, back when we actually enjoyed each other's company. "About last night," she began, settling onto the living room couch and patting the cushion beside her. "I think we both said some things we didn't mean." I sat down, but not where she'd indicated. Instead, I chose the armchair across from her, creating a physical distance that matched the emotional one I was suddenly aware of. "Did we?" I asked. Her smile flickered. "Of course. We were both stressed, and having Jim Haskell there made everything awkward. I should have prepared my family better, told them more about your background. Should have told them I'm not actually a failure, you mean?" "Greg, please. You're not a failure. You're just between opportunities right now." The phrase hit me like a slap. Between opportunities, as if losing my engineering job and starting my own business was some kind of extended vacation, rather than the hardest thing I'd ever done. "Right," I said. "Between opportunities." She leaned forward, reaching for my hand. Her touch was warm, familiar, and completely hollow. "The important thing is that we're a team. We support each other, even when things get complicated." "How complicated are we talking about, Elise?" Something shifted in her expression, a tiny crack in her perfect composure. "What do you mean?" "I mean, how complicated does it get when you're sleeping with Carter Blaine?" The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I watched her face cycle through surprise, denial, calculation, and finally, a kind of cold resignation. "I don't know what you think you know," she said carefully. "I know you've been meeting him at lake houses for the past 3 months. I know you bought new lingerie in September. The receipts are still in your purse. I know you've been taking long lunches on Thursdays and coming home smelling like cologne that costs more than I make in a week." She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, the mask was completely gone. What I saw underneath was worse than anger or guilt. It was indifference. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." I studied her face, looking for some trace of the woman I'd married. She was still there, somewhere beneath the careful makeup and calculated expressions. But she felt like a stranger. "I just found out this morning," I said. "Your laptop was open." She winced. "That was careless of me." "Was it? Or did you want me to find out?" The question seemed to surprise her. She tilted her head, considering it with the same analytical approach she brought to her PR campaigns. "Maybe I did," she said finally. "Maybe I'm tired of pretending." "Pretending what?" "That this marriage is working. That we're happy. That you're enough." The last words hit harder than I'd expected. Not because they were cruel, though they were, but because they were honest. Maybe the first honest thing she'd said to me in months. "So what now?" I asked. "Now we figure out how to handle this like adults. Carter has money, connections. He can provide things that," she gestured vaguely around our modest living room, "that I can't, that you won't. There's a difference, Greg. You had opportunities. Jim Haskell practically offered you a job last night, and I could see in your face that you're going to turn him down. You'd rather fix boats and feel sorry for yourself than actually build something." I stood up, suddenly needing distance from her, from this conversation, from the casual way she was dismantling our life together. "You're right," I said. "I would rather fix boats than sell my soul to impress people who think wearing an apron makes me less of a man." That's exactly what I'm talking about. Everything is about your pride, your feelings, your wounded ego. When do I get to matter? You've been mattering to Carter Blaine for 3 months. How's that working out for you? She smiled then, and it was the first genuine expression I'd seen from her all morning. "Better than you might think." I left the house before I said something I'd regret, or before I said something honest enough to match her cruelty. My truck started on the 3rd try. Another reminder of all the things in my life that weren't quite working, and I drove aimlessly through town, trying to process the fact that my marriage was over. I ended up at the Loon's Nest, a bar near the harbor that catered to fishermen, boat builders, and other people who worked with their hands. It was barely noon, but I needed somewhere to think, and Frankie Morrison, who owned the place, had always been good about letting people nurse a beer and work through their problems. "Little early, even for you," Frankie said as I settled onto a bar stool. She was a woman in her 60s who'd been running the bar since her husband died, and she had the kind of practical wisdom that came from listening to other people's troubles for 30 years. Special circumstances, I said. She poured me a beer without asking what I wanted. Wife trouble? How'd you guess? You've got that look, like someone just explained the rules of a game you didn't know you were playing. I took a long sip of beer and stared at the nautical decorations covering the walls. Ship wheels, old fishing nets, photographs of boats that had probably been scrapped decades ago. It was the kind of place Elise would never set foot in, which suddenly made it feel like the safest place in town. Frankie, I said, what would you do if you found out someone you trusted had been lying to you for months? Depends on the lie, and depends on whether they were sorry about it. What if they weren't sorry? What if they thought you deserved it? She leaned against the bar, studying my face with the kind of attention most people reserved for crossword puzzles. Then I'd make sure they understood the consequences of that choice. I was still thinking about those words when my phone buzzed with a text from my oldest friend, Mike Sullivan. We'd known each other since high school, and he'd been best man at my wedding. The message was short. Heard about last night. You okay? I stared at the text, wondering how news of the Thanksgiving dinner disaster had already spread. Then I remembered that Mike's wife, Jennifer, was friends with Julia, Elise's sister. In a town this size, gossip moved faster than wildfire. I typed back, "Been better. Can we talk?" His response came immediately. "My place, 20 minutes." I finished my beer, left money on the bar, and headed back to my truck. As I drove through town, I found myself noticing things I'd overlooked before. The real estate signs in front yards, many of them bearing Carter Blaine's company logo. The expensive cars parked outside the country club, where Elise played tennis twice a week. The subtle markers of a social hierarchy I'd never paid much attention to because I'd assumed I was part of it. Now I was beginning to understand that I'd never been part of anything. I'd just been useful. Mike's house was a mirror image of mine. Same builder, same era, same middle-class aspirations made manifest in brick and vinyl siding. But where my house felt empty and staged, Mike's felt lived in. Kids' toys on the front porch, a basketball hoop in the driveway, the comfortable chaos of a family that actually enjoyed being together. "You look like hell," Mike said when he opened the front door. "Feel worse." He led me to his garage, where he kept a refrigerator stocked with beer and a workbench covered with the remnants of various home improvement projects. It was his sanctuary, the place he went when he needed to think or when Jennifer needed space to manage their 3 kids without his help. "So," he said, handing me a beer, "want to talk about it?" I told him everything. The apron, the laptop, the emails, the conversation with Elise that morning. He listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or shaking his head, but mostly just letting me get it all out. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry, man," he said finally. "That's rough. The thing is, I'm not even surprised. Looking back, all the signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. What are you going to do?" It was the question I'd been avoiding all morning. What was I going to do? File for divorce? Fight for half of assets we'd built together? Pretend none of this had happened, and try to save a marriage that had been dying for years? "I don't know," I said. "Part of me wants to just walk away, start over somewhere else. And the other part?" I thought about the way Elise had smiled when she talked about Carter providing things I couldn't, the casual cruelty of her assessment that I wasn't enough, the years I'd spent trying to be the husband she wanted while she was already looking for my replacement. The other part wants to make sure she understands what she's throwing away. Mike raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning maybe it's time she learned that the man she's been treating like hired help isn't as helpless as she thinks. The plan started forming that night as I sat in my workshop, surrounded by half-finished boat repairs and the tools of a trade Elise considered beneath her. I'd always been good at solving problems. It's what made me a decent engineer and a better boat mechanic. You look at what's broken, figure out why it's broken, and then you fix it. My marriage was broken because my wife thought I was weak, that I'd accept humiliation and betrayal because I didn't have the spine to fight back. She'd miscalculated. I started with research. Carter Blaine turned out to be exactly what I'd expected. Third-generation money, Ivy League education, the kind of man who'd never had to wonder if he could afford something. His real estate development company specialized in luxury waterfront properties, which meant he bought up working harbors and turned them into playgrounds for people like himself. His personal life was equally predictable. Divorced twice, no kids, a reputation for expensive tastes and short attention spans. according to the society pages of the local newspaper, which I'd never bothered reading before. He was a regular at charity galas, yacht club events, and the kind of parties where people paid $1,000 a plate to eat rubber chicken and feel important. He was also, I discovered, exactly the kind of man who would appeal to Elise, rich enough to provide the lifestyle she thought she deserved, connected enough to advance her career, and shallow enough that she could manage him the same way she managed everything else in her life. What he wasn't, based on everything I could find, was particularly smart. I spent the weekend gathering intelligence while Elise attended what she claimed was a weekend marketing seminar in Boston. She left Friday morning with an overnight bag and a story about networking opportunities. She came back Sunday evening with a tan that definitely hadn't come from a conference room and a new piece of jewelry she claimed was a gift from the seminar organizers. How was the seminar? I asked as she unpacked her bag. Productive. Lots of good contacts. She held up a silk scarf I'd never seen before. They gave us gift bags. Generous of them. She paused in her unpacking, studying my face for signs of suspicion or anger. I kept my expression neutral, interested but not invasive. It was a skill I'd learned during 12 years of marriage to a woman who treated every conversation like a negotiation. Greg, she said carefully, I've been thinking about what we discussed the other day. Which part? The part about figuring out how to handle this like adults. I sat down on the edge of our bed, watching her fold clothes with mechanical precision. Everything had its place in Elise's world, including inconvenient husbands and guilty consciences. What did you have in mind? I think we should consider a trial separation. Give ourselves some space to figure out what we really want. And what do you really want, Elise? She stopped folding and looked directly at me for the first time since she'd come home. I want to be happy. I want to feel like I'm building something instead of just maintaining it. The words stung because they contained just enough truth to be effective. We had been maintaining our marriage rather than building it. But the difference between us was that I'd thought maintenance was a form of love, while she'd seen it as evidence of failure. Okay, I said. A trial separation. She blinked, clearly surprised by my easy agreement. Okay, you're right. We both need space to figure things out. How long were you thinking? Maybe 6 months? That would give us time to really evaluate where we are. 6 months. Long enough for her to see if Carter Blaine was serious about her, or if she was just another in his series of expensive distractions. Long enough for her to test the waters of her new life without the inconvenience of divorce proceedings. That sounds reasonable, I said. Do you want me to move out, or would you prefer to find your own place? I hadn't thought about the logistics yet. Of course she hadn't. Elise was excellent at making decisions, but terrible at dealing with consequences. She could decide to have an affair, but she'd never considered what would happen when her husband found out. She could ask for a separation, but she hadn't thought about who would pay for 2 households, or how we'd divide our belongings. I'll move out, I said. It'll be easier that way. Greg, I don't want you to think this is about punishment or blame. We just need to figure out if we can fix what's broken between us. I almost laughed. She was still trying to manage the narrative, to frame her affair as some kind of mutual marital problem rather than a choice she'd made. But I just nodded and told her I understood. That night, after she'd gone to sleep, I made a phone call to Jim Haskell. I'd been carrying his business card for 4 days, and it was time to see if his job offer was genuine. Greg, he said when I identified myself. I was hoping to hear from you. Have you given any thought to our conversation? I have. Would it be possible to meet sometime this week? I'd like to learn more about the position. Absolutely. How about Wednesday morning? My office, say 10 o'clock? That works for me. Excellent. And Greg, I'm glad you called. We need people like you. People like me. It was a phrase I'd heard before, usually from Elise's family, but with a very different meaning. To them, people like me were the ones who served turkey and stayed quiet during important conversations. To Jim Haskell, apparently, people like me were valuable. I spent Monday and Tuesday preparing for the interview and looking for apartments. I found a small place above Murphy's Cafe, the same coffee shop where Elise had bought our peace offering lattes. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the location was perfect. Walking distance to the harbor where my boat repair business was located, close enough to downtown that I could bike to most places, and cheap enough that I could afford it even if the job with Haskell didn't work out. The interview went better than I'd expected. Haskell's company was bidding on a massive harbor redevelopment project, and they needed someone who understood both the engineering challenges and the local political landscape. My background in municipal infrastructure made me an ideal candidate, and my recent experience running my own business had taught me things about project management that I'd never learned in my corporate job. When could you start? Haskell asked as we wrapped up our conversation. I'm in the middle of a trial separation, I said. I could start as soon as I get settled in my new place. He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask for details. That would be next week. Monday, if that works for you. Perfect. And Greg? The harbor project is going to be controversial. There are people in this town who won't like what we're planning, and they're going to fight us every step of the way. Are you comfortable with that? I thought about Elise's casual dismissal of my boat repair business, her assumption that I'd rather feel sorry for myself than build something meaningful. I thought about Carter Blaine's luxury waterfront properties and the working families who got displaced when harbors became playgrounds for the wealthy. I'm comfortable with it, I said, as long as we're building something that benefits the whole community, not just the people who can afford waterfront condos. Haskell smiled. That's exactly why we need you. I moved into my new apartment on Thursday. It was smaller than the house I'd shared with Elise, but it felt bigger somehow, lighter. The morning sun came through the kitchen window, and I could hear the sounds of the harbor, boat engines, seagulls, the low conversations of fishermen heading out for the day. Elise helped me pack, maintaining the fiction that our separation was mutual and temporary. She was almost cheerful as we sorted through 12 years of accumulated possessions, as if dividing up our life together was just another project to be managed efficiently. You should take the good coffee maker, she said, wrapping it carefully in newspaper. You're the one who actually uses it. Thanks. And the workshop tools, obviously. I never understood half of what they were for anyway. I loaded box after box into my truck, each one containing pieces of the life I'd thought we were building together. Books we'd bought on vacations, wedding gifts from friends who'd believed we were happy, photographs from better times when Elise's smiles had been genuine and my own had come easily. I think that's everything, she said as I carried the last box to the truck. We stood in the driveway of our house, her house now, I supposed, and I waited for her to say something meaningful, an apology maybe, or an acknowledgement of what we were really ending. Instead, she straightened my collar like she was sending me off to work. Take care of yourself, Greg. You too. I was halfway to town when I realized she hadn't asked for my new address. The apartment above Murphy's Cafe came furnished, which meant I didn't have to worry about buying a bed or a couch or any of the domestic infrastructure that makes a place feel like home. I unpacked my clothes, set up my coffee maker on the small counter, and arranged my tools in the closet that would serve as my workshop until I could find something better. By Friday evening, I was settled enough to sit by the window with a beer and watch the town go about its business. Main Street was busy with weekend shoppers, families heading to dinner, couples walking hand in hand toward the harbor. It looked like a postcard of small-town American life, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and cared about their community. It was also the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, which meant my separation from Elise was already common knowledge. I'd gotten sympathetic looks from the cashier at the hardware store, a free coffee from Murphy himself, and a dinner invitation from Mike Sullivan that I'd politely declined. I was beginning to understand that my marriage hadn't just ended. It had become a public event, something for the town to discuss and analyze and take sides on. And in a community where reputation mattered, that gave me a kind of power I'd never had before. My phone rang as I was finishing my beer. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Greg, this is Carter Blaine. I think we should talk. Carter Blaine wanted to meet at the yacht club, which told me everything I needed to know about how he saw this conversation playing out. The club was his territory, full of people who knew him and respected his money. It was meant to intimidate me, to remind me of my place in the social hierarchy. I suggested Murphy's Cafe instead. I don't think that's appropriate, he said, his voice carrying the kind of automatic authority that comes from never being told no. This is a delicate situation. We need privacy. Murphy's has a back room, very private, and they make excellent coffee. There was a pause. I could practically hear him calculating whether agreeing to my suggestion would make him look weak or reasonable. Fine, he said finally. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. I arrived 15 minutes early and claimed the corner table in Murphy's back room, positioning myself so I could see anyone who walked through the door. It was a habit I'd developed during my engineering days. Always know your exits. Always control your environment when possible. Carter arrived exactly on time, which I respected. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested regular visits to expensive barbers and personal trainers. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced, his clothes expensive but understated. Greg, thank you for agreeing to meet. Of course. Coffee? Please, I poured from the carafe Murphy had left on the table, noting that Carter's hands were steady and his eye contact was direct. Whatever else he might be, he wasn't a coward. I assume you know why I wanted to talk, he said. I assume it has something to do with my wife. Your estranged wife, from what I understand. I took a sip of coffee and studied his face. He was handsome in a conventional way. Strong jaw, good teeth, the kind of features that look natural in magazine advertisements. But there was something calculating in his eyes, a quality I recognized from my years with Elise. He was used to getting what he wanted through charm and persistence. Estranged is one word for it, I said. Greg, I want you to know that I have tremendous respect for you. What happened between Elise and me, it wasn't planned. These things just develop sometimes. These things, feelings, connections, you know how it is. I set down my coffee cup and leaned back in my chair. Actually, I don't. I've been married for 12 years, and I've never had an affair. So why don't you explain to me how these things develop? A flush crept up his neck, but his voice remained steady. I think we both know that marriages can become complicated. People grow apart. Needs change. Whose needs changed, Carter? Yours or hers? I think that's between Elise and me. No, I think it's between Elise and me. You're just the distraction. The words hit their target. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw past the practiced charm to something harder underneath. I'm not here to argue with you, he said. I'm here to try to handle this situation like adults. What situation is that? The divorce, the settlement, making sure everyone gets what they need without unnecessary complications. I almost laughed. He was trying to negotiate,